Hi there, Carolyn Peeler here in Ellen Hudson's classroom, and I'd like to wish you a happy new year. This is my first tutorial with you in 2016, and I wish you a wonderful year ahead. Today we're going to be working on this card project, and then at the end of the video, stay tuned because we have a bonus layout that is based on the same techniques and products. To get started on today's card, you'll need to cut yourself a card blank. That is a 4¼ inch by 5½ inch piece of white cardstock, and that's what we're going to use to build our card upon. And then we're going to use pattern paper from the Jen Hadfield Homemade collection for Pebbles. It's the Do-It-Yourself Home collection, and that's where the wood grain paper and the blue paper comes from. And then you're also going to want to grab the quote. Now, the quote is available for you today as a free download. It's a PDF that you're going to find at the bottom of today's post in the classroom. You're going to find a download link for that. And the quote says, "Winter is a time for comfort, for good food and warmth, for the touch of a friendly hand, and for a talk beside the fire. It is a time for home." So that's what we're going to be using as the focal point on today's card. A lovely sentiment to reach out to a friend or family member. As you can see here, I've been laying this Lawn Fawn Hearts die cut onto this red cardstock, and I'm holding the dies in place using some washi tape. You could also use Scotch tape if you want, just something that has a really low tack. Now I'm going to go ahead and take it over to my die cut machine so that we can cut the holes in it. As I remove the washi, some of the hearts popped out, but some of them you'll just need to pop with your fingers. And you'll want to keep those hearts because we can use them for the bonus layout that's at the end. Now we're going to sort of position everything in place, make sure we're happy with how everything looks. And once we are, we're going to go ahead and use adhesive to put everything in place. Now I'm starting with this wood grain paper. The reason why I'm starting with it is because I want to be sure that when it's glued in place, it is not glued so that you see it from behind the hearts in the negative space of the hearts. I just want to see the white cardstock. So I'm starting with that, and then everything else sort of builds off that. You're just going to glue with your regular, your preferred paper adhesive. One other thing to note with that wood grain paper is you will see that the top edge of it is torn, and that gives it a really nice sort of organic, natural look as opposed to the regimented, total straight lines that are visible everywhere else on the card. So we're building the card front right now, gluing everything in place, and you'll notice that I have pattern paper hanging off the edges. I'm going to end up going ahead and trimming those with my scissors. I find personally I prefer to cut my pattern papers a little bit large and then trim them to size, because I hate having issues where you cut things and you think your size is perfect and then you find out you're like a millimeter off or something like that. That drives me crazy. So in general, when I'm building my projects, I tend to cut my pattern paper a little bit large and then go with my scissors or my paper trimmer later and cut everything exactly right size-wise. After the quote is glued down, and you can see here when I turn it over, you can see that this is leftover paper from what I printed, the cardstock that I printed the quotes onto. But it's totally fine because it's going to be glued onto an actual card later, so you won't see those printed words on the back side of the card blank. As you can see here, I'm now distressing the edge of my card, and I'm using the Vintage Photo Distress ink by Ranger. And then I'm going to put a rub-on the top, and this is from one of the Tim Holtz rub-on sheets. It's a really nice set. So you peel the rub-on from the backing, put it in place, and then I'm simply going to rub it off using my fingernail. This is actually one of my shorter fingernails, but if you don't have fingernails or you'd like to use something else, popsicle stick works great. The handle on your scissors would work as well. Just don't use the tip of your scissors because that will scratch the cardstock underneath. And there we are. All right, now we're going to add the buttons onto our card. And for these, I usually like to take a mechanical pencil and I swirl it so that the lead is quite far from the tip of the pencil. And by doing that, I can lay my buttons in place and then poke through with the lead to make little markings for where the holes are so that I can come with my needle and mark everything so that it's really, really easy and you don't have to wonder if you're getting everything positioned correctly. So this is just kitchen string that I'm using. I tied a knot in the back end of it. And then you're simply going to sew each button on. You can go through each button twice if you want. I decided to go through each one once. Now the other thing that you might note is that I also only poked holes for the bottom two. That is because I discovered that the last button actually still had a little bit of plastic over the hole openings. So when I marked it with the pencil, it actually did not mark through to the paper. So here you can see I'm going with the needle and I'm going to poke through that plastic. And now I'll just hold the button in place with my finger, go with the needle and poke a hole. And in that way, it made it fairly easy because it was the last button. It was really easy to position it. If it's the middle button that's not marked, that's a little bit more tricky. But when it's the last button, it's not so difficult to figure out the positioning of it so that it's, you know, nice and symmetrical. Then you simply tie off your string at the end, and you can cut it with your scissors, and you're good to go. We are in place. Now we are gluing this to an actual card. So this is a piece of white cardstock that I took. It was an 8.5 by 11 piece of cardstock, and I cut it 5.5 by 8.5, folded it in half, and now I went ahead and glued the card blank onto this card. Another thing to note, when I pick it up here, you can see that there is a sewing line, a zigzag between the bottom of the quote and the blue pattern paper. I simply did that on my sewing machine, just a regular old sewing machine. And you'll want to do that before you glue the card blank onto the actual functional card. That way the receiver will not see a stitching line when they open up the card. Now for the final step, I took glossy accents and I filled in each heart. Now to do that, what you're going to want to do with the bottle is using the little fine tip. You'll want to outline the heart first, or an area of the heart first, and then squeeze to fill in. And when you do that, the glue will not go beyond where you have your outline, so you can keep help stop it from overflowing in that way. Now I'm not going to show you doing this for the whole card because really the process is the same for each heart. But I went ahead and filled in each of the 5 hearts. Now this is a nice step because it does add some visual interest to the front of your card. If you're running short on time though, definitely this is a step that you could leave off. The card will look lovely without it, but there's just a little bit more interest with it. All right, so as I said at the beginning, I also have a bonus layout for you. This is a clean and simple layout, very, very easy to reproduce. I've done it in 12 by 12, but it actually would look really good sized, or really nice sized down to a 4 by 4 size as well. Once again, I'm using paper from that same collection. That was the Jen Hadfield homemade do-it-yourself 6 by 6 paper pad. And this is the same blue paper that was at the bottom of the greeting card. As you can see, I have a large piece of 12 by 12 white cardstock, and then I have a piece of craft cardstock that was cut 11.5 inches by 11.5 inches and glued in place. And you can see here that I am distressing the edges of the pattern paper. I also distressed the edge of the photos and the edge of the quote and the edge of all the cardstocks as well. Just adds a bit of contrast to the edge of each element. So this is the same ink that we used on the first one, which is the Vintage Photo Distress ink. Now we're going to slide that behind the photo, and I've sort of got them tilted a little bit. Then I'm going to use these Kelly Take Note stamps by Hero Arts and the Black Soot Distress ink. And we're going to stamp this quote onto a little strip of white cardstock, just like so. And once that's done, you'll want to notch the edge of that into a flag shape. You're also going to take your hearts, and in this case, you'll want to cut your smallest heart from that Lawn Fawn set, because we only had 5 from the card, so you'll also want to go ahead and cut the smallest one, and then sew them onto that blue piece of pattern paper. It's easiest to do that before you glue that blue paper down to the cardstock, if you'd like. Once you've sewed down the center of each of the hearts, then you can go ahead and bend up each side, as you can see that I'm doing here, so you get this really nice 3D effect. And that's really all there is to it. I also sewed along the edge of the craft cardstock to give a little bit more interest as well. So you've got this nice 3D effect on a 12 by 12 page, but this would also look really nice as a 6 by 6, 8 by 8, or 4 by 4 page. Thanks so much for joining me. I hope you had an enjoyable time with me, and remember to check out that download, which will be at the bottom of the post on the classroom. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.